I mean, if I'm gonna go to any other state, I'd rather go to like Washington, Hawaii, maybe. That'd be a good one to
Yeah.
go.
Southern Ohio's great, and
Southern Ohio.
Kentucky is really beautiful. It's
Mm.
rolling hills. You see those things about horse farms and stuff in Kentucky, and really beautiful, green, and lush, and lovely.
Yeah.
Southern Ohio's like that. So it really is lovely,
Okay.
geography wise.
All right, let's put this. Here we go. Happy November. Can you believe it's November?
Yes.
Anyone else decorated for Christmas? Um, my wife is very like, okay, one's done, on to the next, right? So it was literally Saturday morning. My oldest put on like Christmas music on our way to soccer. And then we came home from soccer and my wife was like, okay, we're undecorating. We're decorating for Dia de los Muertos. And then tomorrow we're decorating for Christmas. It was like holiday mishmash all weekend. I had like 3 holidays in one weekend, right? And I was like, what about Thanksgiving? It's like one of my favorites because it's all about the food. Well, and family, but you know, the food. Food makes family more tolerable. I don't know. So and
Yes, it
football.
does.
It's the holy trinity of F's. Football, family, and food on Thanksgiving. I love Thanksgiving. But you know, we have like full blown moved on, right? Christmas music. Like I'm not ready. Like they were like literally like as they're eating their Halloween candy, let's do it. I know you were listening to Christmas music before. Yeah, I know, yeah. Anyway, and then the Dodgers, right? That was very exciting. That was quite a game. Oh, those calls were so close. Like we were watching it, like everything was so like close and exciting. All the trick-or-treaters, like I was laughing because all these fireworks were going off and like people were like screaming and honking. And then people posting like, why is everyone celebrating? I'm like, tell me you're out of touch. Right? Like you don't even know the Dodgers are playing right now. But it was an exciting weekend and now it's November and we don't have that much left. Again, it always feels like it goes fast from here, but we still have fun and interesting topics to cover, so that's good. We will keep going with schizophrenia today, and then we'll get into personality disorders a little bit too as we wrap this up. But we spent a lot of time last time. Let me go back. All right, so we talked about all the different symptoms. That's what we spent a lot of time last time. All the positive ones, which again, additions, not positive good, but additions or excesses, most common by a mile. And then, oops, the negative ones, which are deficits. And then the psychomotor ones, which are like movements and kind of odd patterns and grimaces and gestures and things like that. So it's some combination of all of these. And I think I mentioned last time that it used to even be that we distinguish the type of this based on your symptoms, but now it's just schizophrenia, right? And we look at like some combination of all these different symptoms. So we'll look at course, cause, and treatment before we are done with this. With this one, it tends to show up in a person's like late teens to mid 30s. That's kind of like the common age. Now, it can happen really young, can have childhood schizophrenia, like we talked about last time. And it can happen older. There are people who have it later, there are people who have it earlier. But in general, it tends to be something that happens in like your late teens, mid 30s. And men tend to go through it a little earlier than women for the most part. And really wild, I'll never forget this because I had a young man in my class, my first semester here, and it was in this room, something like that. All right, nobody there, but he was in the like prodromal phase of schizophrenia, right? Like, and really, really bright guy. This unfortunately tends to affect really like bright people a lot of the time. There's a strong correlation. Not that it has to be that way, but it's often the case. But what you tend to see is that people go through 3 phases, the prodromal, active, and residual. And you don't have to go through all of them, and not everyone progresses. But prodromal is when you're starting to have some like odd stuff happening, and you're just kind of starting to maybe like deteriorate a little bit. Maybe you're not sure what's real or what isn't real. I remember after this class, he came up to me and he's like, I have a lot of moments where I'm not sure what's real and what isn't. Like I'll wonder if somebody was actually there or somebody actually said something or not, or if it was a dream or if it was reality. And like he had been having this for like years and it was getting worse and worse and worse for him. But like I would never have known that he was struggling had he not said something. Like really bright, top of like everything, really thoughtful, but he has having these moments kind of like privately. People often function pretty okay in the prodromal phase. They're often all right. And only about 25% of people stay here. So it's kind of like this interesting rule of fours where like sometimes people stay and they never get worse. Okay? And then about 50% of people move into active schizophrenia. And with active schizophrenia, you have all the symptoms. It's hard to function. You typically require like treatment of some kind in order to be okay. And then about, like I said, 50% of people kind of stay here. And then 25% of people move into this residual phase. So for some people, they stay in that like main active phase for a long time. Some people get better. Some people never progress. It just kind of follows a different course for everyone. But this one is where you are getting better. You kind of go back to like that early phase. And so for some, it just kind of progresses away. But for the majority of people, like 50% of people, they require some kind of treatment, which we'll talk about in a minute. But he stayed in my class the whole time. He got on medication. He was fine. Like again, like really, really high functioning. A lot of people live with this and they're okay. But if you don't get treatment and you end up here, it can be very easy to kind of have everything fall apart on you, right? And so if you can catch it early, you can oftentimes intervene before it's too like damaging or interferes too much with your life. Oops, let me go back. So in terms of causes, I have a little video about it, but let me kind of present these two and then I'll play it for you. I mentioned this last time, the diathesis stress perspective. There's a lot of biology involved with this, but the leading thought is that schizophrenia is caused by the diathesis stress perspective, which means that you have a biological predisposition, something genetic, like you are predisposed to get this disorder, but whether or not you ever get it has to do with the environment, right? So if you have a big stressor, like an event, a trauma, the use of a drug, right, whatever it might be, it triggers that predisposition to come forward. So like, let's say somebody is born with a genetic predisposition and they go off to war and the stress of combat triggers this to come forward, they might develop it. Now, if they never went off to war, would they have still developed the disorder? It's hard to say, right? Or they use a substance which causes them to hallucinate and brings this forward to the surface. And that's a really common one that we see, that people get drug-induced schizophrenia because they maybe had this predisposition and the drug brought it to the front. So very, very common perspective. And then we think it has a lot to do with dopamine. Dopamine is a big culprit with this disorder. It produces a lot of the like hallucinations and delusions. Those positive symptoms are very strongly correlated to dopamine. So somebody having like way too much dopamine could create those things to be there when they shouldn't be, especially those positive symptoms. And then some abnormal brain structures, like enlarged ventricles. We have a few like correlational kind of things here, but nothing that we've seen definitively. The biggest one is really that diathesis stress and then the dopamine perspective. And that dopamine perspective really drives some of the treatment that we'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so I have a little video that kind of highlights this a little bit. I'll play it for you. They're not the most thrilling, but I think they're helpful. As a side note, the guy in here for what causes schizophrenia, which is a big part of why our treatments are so biological in nature. Now, there are a couple of other thoughts related to this. Freud thought it was caused by what he called a schizophrenogenic mother. I tried to find a mom that looked mad, right? Like a woman who looked angry. Like it's like a cold, domineering, angry mother. Of course, with Freud, everything goes back to the mom. In this case, it would be someone who was like cold, uninterested in the needs of like her children. It was thought for a long time by people like Freud and like some of the psychoanalytic people that followed him and so on, that it was like someone like this, like an environment like that, that would cause someone to have schizophrenia. Now, having someone who's like cold and uninterested and domineering could lead to attachment related issues, which could lead to other disorders, but not necessarily schizophrenia, right? It would be more, again, like biological stuff, but it was a common thought, which only was added to by this idea of like expressed emotion in a family. This one's more likely, like your family environment in general can sometimes be that environmental trigger. It could be that like stressor, if you will, that leads somebody toward this. It's thought that these things play a role, but to what extent we don't know, right? They tend to be more like correlational rather than causal. But it's likely that the environment you grow up in will play some degree of a role, right? Whether it is like causal or just like an adding factor, it's hard to say. But the idea of like a cold mother could cause this, not a lot of support behind it. Freud's ideas started a lot of things, but they didn't necessarily finish them, right? He wasn't so great with like the support for them. Any like comments or thoughts or questions, anything about the causes? Again, mostly biological, but some degree of like cultural, social stuff maybe playing a role. Then with treatment, we tend to struggle to treat this, right? And I mentioned this last time that sometimes it's hard to get an accurate idea of what's going on if somebody's struggling with schizophrenia, right? Like it might be hard to get an accurate depiction of what they're struggling with, what they're thinking, what they're experiencing. But if we go way back, remember, like way back in chapter 1, feels like a long time ago, we used to lock people away all the time and just like give them these awful conditions. And then it wasn't until like the 1900s, like mid 1900s, that we tried to treat people with disorders with a little more respect and like kindness. A lot of the people who were probably locked up and locked away were people struggling with psychotic disorders like schizophrenia, right? So we've had this like approach of trying to be more like respectful and like promote meaningful activities since like the 1950s. But we do really struggle to treat schizophrenia well. The drugs are really hard to tolerate. It's hard to give people the support that they need. There's a couple of like little things like token economies and like small things. And then the big treatments are really medications, which we'll get to on the next slide. But when people are like hospitalized or put in some kind of like institution, we often do like little token economy programs to help like give meaningful, like targeted behaviors. Really common with kids. Like we use these a lot with kids. I guarantee you've all had one of these at some point where you get stickers or points or check marks. And when you get a certain number of them, you can trade them in for something you want. Really common in schools. We do this a lot with patients who have schizophrenia who need like a tangible thing to focus on, right? Like very small, tangible goals. It's often used in places where people are institutionalized. And then trying to treat people like kindly and with humility and so on. But generally, it really focuses just on medication, right? The main way to treat schizophrenia is with an antipsychotic medication. So schizophrenia is a psychotic disorder. Antipsychotics are the drugs to help treat that. They help to like correct distorted thinking or confused thinking. And these were discovered in the 1940s, but they've only gotten better and better and better. And some of these antipsychotic drugs are even used for things like bipolar disorder. Now, like Abilify is a common one. That one's often used for bipolar disorder. Zyprexa, same thing. But these drugs, they work a lot on like dopamine and serotonin, right? And they work on those like different neurotransmitters that they mentioned in that video. And they're sometimes called neuroleptic drugs because they produce so many neurological issues. Really common with these drugs that people end up with what we call extrapyramidal effects, right? They have like bizarre movements and grimaces and twitches, which sometimes they already have as part of having schizophrenia, but really typical of this, like that people start shaking or they can't sit still, they get tremors, because these drugs are so hard to tolerate. Kind of like lithium is hard to tolerate and leads to some of these too. But they lead to these like extreme restlessness and twisting, hard to sleep. So what happens is people take one of these and then they take another drug to help with the side effects, and like they end up on multiple drugs if the schizophrenia is really like severe. So we do use a lot of these antipsychotics. There's some newer ones that are called atypicals, like the Abilify and Seroquel and Zyprexa. But in general, these are just hard to tolerate. They reduce the amount of symptoms, but then they create new ones, right? And so this is an area where we still have a long way to go in terms of treatment. I have the follow-up video with the same guy who's talking about some of these common drugs. So I'll play that for you and then we'll come back here. But again, really hard to tolerate, unfortunately. Drugs make treatment possible. I mean, without these medications, people really struggle to have any kind of like level of normalcy. And they're getting better, right? Like the new ones down here, like I said, Abilify, Zyprexa, Seroquel, and a couple others are so much better than like the original drugs, but they just lead to like all these extrapyramidal effects, enough so that they're like actual like symptoms and like syndromes that people can have, like tardive dyskinesia, where it's just constant shaking and tremors. But without them, it really is hard to let anyone have, like, who has an active full-blown schizophrenia, to have any kind of like level of normalcy. So these are typically used in as low of a dose as possible, but they make, like the symptoms quite a bit less, if that makes sense.
What was the percentage that you left out that was like, it helps 73% or what was?
Oh, that he gave? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they tend to be really helpful. They help the majority of people, but finding the right one is tricky. And we didn't meet for this unit, but it's very similar to antidepressants, right? Like it can take so much trial and error. Yeah, like, and if any of you have ever tried a medication that's for mental illness, like it takes a long time to find the right one, right? Like some people are lucky and they find the right one right away, the right amount, the right dosage. But like even something like antidepressants, like oftentimes people take months of going on one and can I tolerate it? Does it help? And then going off of it and then starting another one. And that's often the case here as well. Yeah.
All drugs, right?
Any drug, right? Like everyone is so different in the way that they respond to medication, and you just never know which ones are going to bother you or not bother you. So you have to not only have it be helpful, but then you can tolerate whatever side effects come from it, right? So you have to find that perfect combination. Yeah, it takes a little bit sometimes, sadly. Like I said before, medication, therapy and treatment, not really all that helpful or possible. We try not to institutionalize people in general. Like that's not a common treatment anymore. It was like in the 80s, even we put anyone with a mental illness in like a psychiatric hospital, and you were stayed there, you were removed from life. We talked about this again in chapter 1, that back in like the 80s and 90s, there was this huge wave of like kind of everything closing down. Early 2000s, we saw most of them close. You mentioned Channel Islands. Speaking of Channel Islands, right, used to be a psychiatric institution, right? There's a bunch of these that were like converted to other things. It's just not popular to lock people away anymore, because once you are released, then you struggle to go back to life. So trying to find a way to treat people more in like the community. But what happens with this is community care is not enough, right? So out in your own life is not enough, but being hospitalized is too much. So it leads to what we call the revolving door syndrome with this disorder specifically, where people are treated in the community and they get worse. And so they end up being institutionalized. We get them back on track, get them on their medication, everything okay, release them, then they fall through the cracks again, and then they have to be readmitted. They're like in and out of a facility constantly. We see that revolving door syndrome a lot with schizophrenia. We have like halfway houses to try and help, like a crisis home, but those don't tend to be adequate either. So there's a lot of promise of like community treatment, but it's not enough. But institutionalizing people isn't common, and it's often not paid for by insurance. So there's kind of like this tricky middle ground where it can be hard to not only find the right drugs, but the right combination of support and not support, therapy, in addition to like medication. So definitely one of the harder disorders to treat just because of the nature of the symptoms, right? But a lot of medications to help, just they're not the easiest, like I said, to tolerate. Sorry, you yelled at me. Any other like thoughts or comments or questions, stories, anything else with schizophrenia at all before we leave it behind? Okay. All right. So from schizophrenia to personality disorders, these ones are really controversial and interesting. A lot of your characters, a lot of you suspect personality disorders for your characters in your films. So hopefully this will be helpful for that paper. But these are an interesting group, right? Again, controversial because what we're seeing in essence is that it's your whole personality that is disordered. And that's kind of a hard one to accept. And then where do we draw the line between like normal versus like a disorder? So we'll talk about that. They tend to fall into different clusters. But when we're talking about this unit, we're looking at your personality. Your personality is what makes you you, what makes you different from every other person on this planet, right? Like your unique and enduring patterns of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, your inner experiences, your outward behavior, the way you dress, the way you act, the things you like, the things you don't like, everything about you makes up your personality, right? And we're complicated, right? I always love with Snow White. They're one thing, right? They're sleepy or they're whatever, right? Like bashful. They have one characteristic that defines them. We have thousands, right? Like we're complicated individuals, right? And our personalities change, but they tend to be pretty similar over time. Like they kind of only change a little bit. The person you are when you're young is pretty similar to the person you are when you're older, with like some maturity level differences, and life can sometimes push us as well. But with this, we're talking about a disorder that affects your entire way of interacting with the world. So what we're saying is that you have inflexible and maladaptive ways of thinking and behaving that you learned early in life and that persist across everything that you do. Okay, so you tend to be kind of specifically only one way or like a limited number of ways across everything that you do, and you don't have that flexibility to adapt. Most of us are able to kind of adapt to things as they come. Someone with a personality disorder approaches everything in a relatively rigid way. Though, of course, like everything else, they exist on a spectrum. So with these, we're looking at three clusters. We a great short answer question. I love these like threes, right? What are the three clusters? There are the odd ones, odd eccentric, the dramatic ones, and then the anxious ones. And we'll talk about all of them. Altogether, there are 10 different personality disorders. And these, again, controversial. There's been a lot of discussion about whether or not they should be viewed in a different way, whether they should be removed from the DSM, a lot of confusion. Some, especially within categories, they get kind of complicated to tell apart. So we'll look at all of them. Here's kind of like an overview. So there are 3 odd and eccentric ones: paranoid, schizoid, schizotypal. There are 3 anxious or fearful ones: avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive. And then there are 4 dramatic ones: histrionic, narcissistic, antisocial, and borderline. Okay, so we'll talk about all of them. And what I'll do with each one is I'll try and write like a few words to help you keep them straight over there on the board. But we'll start with the odd eccentric ones. Okay, so these are ones where people have like odd or weird kind of behaviors, things that tend to leave them isolated, right? Because they're kind of strange or odd in nature. So the first one is paranoid personality disorder. So with each one, all right, just a couple of like phrases. So with this one, people are really suspicious and mistrustful of others. They're always looking for like hidden meanings in things, thinking that people are out to get you in some way. These 3 have a lot in common with schizophrenia that we just covered. I mean, you can even just see it in the like names of them, right? Oftentimes doubting the loyalty of people. Right, so they constantly just kind of don't trust everyone, right? They're often really, really like suspicious. They read into everything, looking for like hidden meanings in things, and even in things that are really like benign or like meaningless in a way. They're often like very distant from other people. They don't get close to people because they don't trust them, right? So oftentimes they tend to be very like isolated, can be very lonely. They want to typically be close to other people, but they don't trust others in order to do so. Very, very sensitive to things, like tend to like struggle with any kind of criticism. Believe that everyone means them harm, They look for hidden meanings in everything. A lot of like very kind of delusional kind of stuff going on here. There's a lot of movies that feature these different things. I have a clip of this one. He mumbles a lot, but he is like doesn't trust anything. And you can see he's got all these like elaborate setups to check for things and traps. It's from an old movie, Conspiracy Theory. Well, I'll play this little clip for you. Just notice how he would fall over if somebody was to sneak in. All his stuff is locked up. Look at it, locks all his food, right? Like, I need to do that with my kids. They steal all my food all the time, right? But locking everything, even though he lives alone, just multiple like setups in that way. Conspiracies in the articles, he's looking for hidden meanings to things. How long would it take me to get in here and out of here if I needed to? Just constantly not trusting and looking for those hidden things with the articles in the newspaper. Very typical of this. Though you see he has no problem like bugs and hygiene stuff isn't his issue. Like he smashes it with the spatula, then hangs it back up, right? Like, so his issue is paranoia, not, anything related to that. But it's a lot of like suspicious, mistrustful behavior. It dominates everything. So think about it with each one of these is there's like these very strong personality characteristics that kind of dominate this individual, right? And like that's how you approach everything. So everyone that he meets is approached with like suspicion and lack of trust and paranoia. And that tends to be the defining characteristic of that one. Schizoid and schizotypal are very schizophrenia-like, hence the names. A lot of like the negative symptoms of schizophrenia here for schizoid. Schizoid, not a lot of like great examples of this like in movies. Like I think the best one I can think of is like Bruce Wayne in the Batman movie. So it's kind of like odd and solitary, like he lives alone, doesn't enjoy being around other people so much. He has very few people that he cares about. So with schizoid, schizoid, I'm gonna write solitary. They have a lot of like coldness. So they don't tend to express a lot of emotion, right? This is again like the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. So they have like a really restricted range of emotion. Right, so just not a lot of like emotional expression in general. They don't take pleasure in a lot of activities. They tend to be loners by choice. So rather than being lonely, it's more like I want to be alone versus like this individual tends to be lonely because they end up isolating themselves. They tend to have a hard time holding jobs that allow them or force them to work with other people. So they try to do a lot of like very solitary kind of activities. Like I said, I would say like Bruce Wayne, probably the best example I can think of. But there's not a lot of like warmth. They don't want to be around other people. It's a lot of those like negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Schizotypal, I have two favorites. This is one of my two. Schizotypal. With schizotypal, you tend to have like some really like odd and peculiar behavior. So like strange dress, strange beliefs, just kind of odd things that separate you out from other people. A lot of ideas of reference, of like delusions of reference. This tends to be someone who kind of stands out as being odd or strange, right? Like everybody kind of knows them as like the weird or like oddball. They tend to dress differently, act differently, have weird things that they say and do. And those weird things that they say and do tend to isolate them out. So they want to oftentimes be close to others, but because they're so eccentric, it kind of isolates them and puts them in like a weird spot. I have a good example of this one. One of my like to be a very common reaction with this disorder. Oftentimes it's like very distorted, almost like magical sort of thinking or beliefs. And oftentimes this individual stands out. Like everyone knows who they are and not necessarily the best way. I have a story with this one. Maybe it's insight into my teenage years. but I had a friend who I would bet anything now, or when I became a psychologist, I was like, I know what I would have called her at the time. But I had a friend in high school who everyone called knee pads. And the reason they called her knee pads is because she literally wore knee pads to school every day, and elbow pads and other things that were odd. But this individual, like such a strange person, and like from a psychological standpoint, like she came from an abusive home, very violent family, and so probably created a lot of these like magical thoughts to counter that. Like thinking about it now as an adult. But at the time, like she always wore like knee pads and a black trench coat. But then at the time, like it was trench coats weren't allowed because of like Columbine and the school shootings. So when they told her she couldn't wear a trench coat, she wore a black sheet as a cape. And they told her she couldn't wear that. And she's like, it's not in the dress code, fought it and won. And so she wore a black sheet, knee pads, and elbow pads to school every day. Now, terrifying individual, like multiple degree black belt. No one would mess with her. So I was safe in a way, all right. I mean, I don't know if I would like she at some point was too weird for me, but for like a whole year, I think it was the psychologist in me. Let's call I'm gonna rationalize it. It was the psychologist in me that was interested in like the whole situation. But where it got even more wild, more than her dress. So her dress was like odd and peculiar. It was the delusions of reference. So this individual believed that she was half human, half dragon. Okay. The dragon half was male and the human half was female. And like she would wander around the school and randomly stop and go like this to try and sprout her dragon wings. Right. I never saw dragon wings, but she tried often. She would pretend to flick people with her dragon tail all the time. Never saw anything happen, of course. But like she always tried to like whack people over with her dragon tail, sprout her dragon wings, believe that the world was going to end, like all these like really odd kind of delusional things. When she got older, she legally changed her name to her dragon name. I've been so curious. I've tried to find this person many years later out of just curiosity. No idea. I don't remember what her dragon name was, right? Sadly. But like just the odd beliefs, right? Like believing that you're half human, half dragon, like the like distorted things with like the delusions of reference, the odd dress, all of those things are very common with this disorder. So if it helps you remember, I think of knee pads with this one. It's always just some like odd, peculiar behavior, right? So like Luna is at one end of the spectrum, like knee pads maybe at the other, but like odd thinking, behavioral eccentricities, very uncomfortable with relationships, right? They often are intensely lonely. They want to be close to others, but their oddities force people away. Yeah.
So for the distinction between schizoid and schizotype, is it, I guess, safe to assume that those that are leaning more towards schizoid are less rendered, or are I guess what I'm trying to say is are there such thing as like malintended schizotype of people? Because like if you use Luna Lovegood, who's kind of like a very nice person.
Yeah.
I have had also a very similar experience to you as well with a friend of mine in school as well, who I would bet anything and they were also very, very friendly as well. So I'm just
trying to tell between the two.
Yeah.
Yeah, so schizotypal has the delusions of reference, like the odd, peculiar behavior and like weird beliefs. Like Luna has like kind of odd like beliefs that she has. Like they're kind of within the realm of like their universe, but not like they're a little outside of it. With schizoid, it's more that they're like a loner and they're flat. So think about like very little emotion, very little affect, don't like to be around other people. Versus the other one, there's often a lot of emotion with schizotypal. It's more the like the odd, peculiar behavior beliefs that make them different. But I mean, even their names make them a little confusing, right? Like there's within categories, there's a lot of overlap. It's very challenging for therapists sometimes to distinguish between 3 or 4 within a group. So you really have to like get to know someone and look at the symptoms. They're very commonly misdiagnosed. But that's the biggest difference between the two, if that
why you
helps. Yeah, he like is a loner, right? Like, and so he's more antisocial, right? We'll get to shortly, right? Like because of the like lack of guilt and empathy and all those things. And has a lot of emotion, right? Just not a lot of like guilt.
Yeah,
in a way.
yeah. You watch the show, it happens in the model.
Yeah, right, and it's really interesting, right? And then the whole like how he was taught a code and like all these things to try and like fit in, helped him fit in to the degree that it did. I loved that show
Yes.
back when it was a thing. Yeah. Any other comments or questions with these three for now? Again, like these are like similar, but it's the odd thinking and perceiving and like beliefs that distinguish the last one here. And then like flat, very little emotion for the middle. All right. Speaking of Dexter, right? So the dramatic ones, the dramatic disorders where people have like a lot of erratic emotions, a lot of emotional out of control kind of stuff. The main issues relate to emotion. And there are 4 here. So we have antisocial and borderline. And then we also have histrionic and narcissistic. So we have a couple of different ones here. But these two are by far the most like dangerous of all of 10. Okay, the first one's most dangerous to others, and the second's most dangerous to self. Okay, so these are 2 of the more stigmatized and well-known personality disorders that we have. So antisocial personality disorder, we commonly might call this person like a psychopath or a sociopath, right? And we tend to use those words a lot. This is the technical name for those 2 words. So if you're thinking psychopath or sociopath, the technical disorder is antisocial personality disorder. Psychopath and sociopath refer to the causes, the like proposed causes of the disorder, versus this is the technical name. Okay. So with antisocial personality, we're looking at someone who, I'm going to put it over here. So with antisocial, they tend to have a distinct lack of remorse. So there's a lack of remorse or empathy. And that is one of the distinguishing features of this disorder, right? That they have no empathy, no remorse, no guilt, right? They don't put themselves in somebody else's shoes, so they don't feel bad about the things that they do. They tend to fail to respect lawful behaviors. So breaking the law, violence, right? Like criminal behavior, lying, conning, deceit. There's a lot of lying and deceit. Very, very common with this disorder, right? So we get kind of this lack of affection for other people, a lot of like unethical, criminal, violent kind of behaviors. The interesting thing with this disorder is you have to have had a couple of things happen beforehand. So when people have this disorder, they had to have had like conduct disorder as a child. So as a child, we had to see evidence that they were often hurting animals, bullying other people, getting in trouble at school, right? They had to have what's called conduct disorder as a younger individual. You also, with this one, this is one of the very few that has an age. You have to be 18 years old in order to be diagnosed with it. Okay, so the other ones, typically, we try not to diagnose these in the teenage years because your personality is still forming. Your personality is still kind of in flux a little bit. But with this one, you have to be 18, you have to be an adult, you have to have evidence of having conduct disorder as a child. And so this is like a very long pattern of breaking the law, bullying or harming other people, not feeling bad about it, and then lack of empathy really, really being like the biggest part. Oftentimes people get in trouble with the law for like harming others, for hurting people, for substance abuse, right? Is very common. A million examples of this in the media from Hannibal, right? Hannibal's a great example. Alex from A Clockwork Orange, Joffrey and Ramsay. There's so many examples in Game of Thrones. That one's an easy one. Dexter is a really another common one. There's so many, right? We tend to portray this in the media a lot. But if you've, again, like sociopath and psychopath, this is the actual technical name for either of them.
Is the requirement of the 18 years because of legal stuff?
Some of it, yeah. So typically, because they had to have had all this stuff as a child, and then when they're an adult, we then transition it to this. So there are a couple of there's oppositional defiant disorder and then conduct disorder. And so they have to have all these things as a child. And then when they're older, yeah, there's like almost a legal implication for like the consequences at this point. So this is one of the few. There aren't very many disorders that have like age stipulations, but this one they do, right? You have to be 18. Other like thoughts or questions? Yeah.
Inaccurate or rude, and if you're like special
They're just not academic, like, or diagnostic. So like they're common terms. Like if you called somebody like a psychopath or a sociopath, like it's not necessarily like rude or inappropriate as much as it's just not accurate. So somebody who has this diagnosis probably would commonly be called one of those things, but this would be the technical name for it, if that makes sense. It's not necessarily rude, it's just not correct. And they're used very commonly, like it's what everyone thinks of first, but it's just not correct. Anything else here? So I have a little like I think the piece of this, like we tend to all think of like violent, criminal, unethical, which is by far what we see the most of. But the lack of empathy is really like one of the more defining characteristics of this. It doesn't always have to be like someone who's murderous and violent, that they don't feel bad and can't put themselves in someone else's shoes is actually the defining element of this. That lack of guilt is the biggest red flag. And I think I found this little clip that shows that in Dexter, like a compilation of him not feeling empathy. Like he just doesn't get it. Like why somebody else would be crying, why somebody else would be upset. And he's learned to try and pretend to fit in, like we were just talking about, but he just can't put himself in somebody else's shoes. And so I have this little clip of his lack of like, it's just, he just doesn't get it at times. And that's really common with this disorder. Told you that someone died or something bad happened, like it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, or like you feel for them, you're trying to empathize in some way. Typically someone with this disorder just doesn't know how to do that. They don't feel that genuine like empathy or like remorse or anything there. And that's one of the biggest characteristics, in addition to like some of the like lying and deceit. He kills all sorts of people in that show, right? He's a brutal murderer. He has a code typically, and like killing people like based on some code that he has, but it's still like this failure to respect the law. It starts when he was young. He mentioned he killed the neighbor's dog, right? There's usually bullying and like animal abuse as a child. It's something that you tend to see and it progresses. But like everything else on a spectrum, but most dangerous to others by a mile, right? A lot of people who are like brutal murderers have had this disorder. Not always, but it happens. Any other thoughts or comments, examples, anything else on antisocial?
We already covered the different psychopath and sociopath.
Yeah, so it
Okay.
relates to no, just that they are relating to the causes, right? So when we talk about someone being a psychopath versus a sociopath, like think social, it has to do with more environmental, social causes. Psychopath is thought to be more like genetic and biological causes. So they tend to think of like the cause, the root cause of it rather than the disorder itself. Borderline, last one that we'll go over today. Borderline is the most dangerous to self. Okay, with borderline, the reason it has this name is it's on the border between being neurotic and psychotic. That's where it comes from. So it's on the border between neurotic and psychotic. It's sometimes called emotionally unstable personality disorder, but the full name or the technical name is borderline personality disorder. And this one, like I said, by far is the most dangerous to self. A lot of like suicidality, a lot of emotional struggles. We see an incredible amount of like emptiness oftentimes feeling very empty, very lonely, very on your own. There's a lot of like reactivity of mood. So people being very emotional, very reactive with their moods. There's an incredible fear of abandonment. All right, this tends to have strong roots in like childhood trauma. What's interesting though, is this is a very commonly misdiagnosed disorder. And there's a newer disorder, this came up earlier in the semester, called CPTSD, right? Where it's like complex post-traumatic stress, which is related to childhood disorder, childhood trauma, attachment trauma, which is very now commonly confused with this. Probably one of the most stigmatized disorders, right? If you tell someone you have borderline, there's a lot of stigma related to it, but it's very commonly related to like CPTSD, which is starting to like replace some of the cases of this, right? They have a lot of commonality and like the fear of abandonment and the reactive mood and the emptiness and so on, right? So kind of an interesting new like pattern that we're seeing with this. But what we see is that people have a lot of like fear of other people leaving them. Their relationships tend to be very like black and white. Really common book, probably one of the most famous books on this. It's called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me, right? And that sums up this disorder so well, right? It's a lot of like black and white. You put someone up on a pedestal, they do something wrong, and now you hate them, right? It's like, I can't even breathe when I'm around you. I love you so much. You're my entire world. They don't pick up the phone when you call them. I hate you. I never wanted to be with you. Like, that's it, we're done. That person leaves, as anyone would if you said those things to them, right? And then you freak out, fear of abandonment. I didn't mean it. Please come back. I'm so sorry. It's that very like cyclical nature. Relationships tend to be kind of like difficult this way. Also commonly confused with bipolar disorder, but it's not. Bipolar doesn't tend to be that fast. They're like 2-week long depressive episodes and then manic episodes. This is like back to back emotional like volatility or reactivity. And it's very common that you see that where somebody is like, everything is wonderful, perfect, and great. The littlest thing happens, they're through the floor, suicidal. I'm going to end my life, right? It's very like very violent, like swings in mood within a very quick period of time, making relationships often very challenging. Like I said, a lot of suicidal like stuff. Suicidality is very common with this disorder, right? It can be very dangerous to self because people get caught in that low spot and they become suicidal, right? And so it can be hard to teach them to get out of that. Yeah. Yeah, you can learn to live with them. You can learn to treat them, and they're on a spectrum. Like, so some people, let's say you have this and you go through like stuff like dialectical behavioral therapy and you learn how to manage it. You could learn to live with it. You could learn to hide it. And some people, I don't know if I'd say outgrow it, but you could kind of like fade out of it, if that makes sense. And the person that you're with can help or not help with that sometimes. But if you can learn how to manage these things, sometimes you can kind of have them fade away a little. Yeah. Yeah, so it depends, right? Like, so there aren't necessarily a lot of like support groups for this. It's a lot of like therapy. All of these require therapy to fill in the skill gaps, if that makes sense. So someone with like antisocial, you would teach them empathy training. Someone with this, you teach them, EBT and how to like challenge their thoughts. Someone with like this, how do we express emotion? How do we challenge the things and be a little more like fit in normal, right? So it's a lot of like finding a therapist who can help fill in the behavioral and thought gaps to help you manage it. Yeah. So, you both moved at the same time, right?
We're practicing.
So,
Swimming.
so this one is, like I said, this book, but dialectical behavioral therapy is a specific type of therapy for this disorder. They have a technique, and somebody asked about it earlier in the semester. It's called Dear Man. Yeah. And each letter stands for something. And it's like this process of like step by step. Like, so you have a thought, right? And so my thought, like, for example, like, again, like you have a partner who doesn't pick up the phone, right? And your instant thought is they don't love me anymore. Okay, and that is kind of a big jump. Maybe they are busy, they didn't hear their phone ring or see their phone ring, but there's a million reasons why they might not have picked up the phone in that moment, right? So the typical person might not be happy that they didn't pick up the phone or respond back, but they'll kind of like work their way through that. They can hold on, they can wait and whatever. Someone with this disorder, they don't pick up the phone, they don't love me anymore, they're gonna leave me, like I'm gonna leave first, angry, it just explodes. Okay, so the idea with stuff like Dearman and dialectical behavioral therapy is to try and more effectively respond to that situation. Okay, so what is the trigger? What is the event that happened? And then let's evaluate it, right? So what are the possible reasons they didn't pick up their phone? What are the alternative explanations for like they don't love me anymore? Okay, what else could possibly be the case, right? Like they're teaching, they're working, they're doing other things at the moment. Like what is it? Right. And then how could I respond more effectively? So it's like step by step teaching people to change that inner dialogue. It takes a long time to fix and change, but it's possible. So if you have somebody who's motivated to change it, you can learn to manage that. And if their partner is aware of it too, that helps as well. Like learning to check the facts, right? Like what are the facts of the situation versus my reaction? And that's a really big part of treating borderline personality disorder. A lot of examples of this as well. I always think of Girl Interrupted, probably the most like famous example of it as well. Oh, I just thought of like Joe from Us would be another one for the first one, right? Though he had some interesting stuff here, like kind of an interesting blur of the two, really interesting character. But this one, I always think of Girl Interrupted as probably the best example. And then Angelina Jolie's character in that is a good example of antisocial. You get a couple of them in one movie. But this one, hard to treat, very dangerous to self and very dangerous to others. Anything else before we kind of run out of?
How dangerous to others.
The first one is dangerous to others
Oh.
and this one dangerous to
Okay.
self, yeah. And these two, dangerous, they're the harder, like more volatile of the disorders that we're talking about in this group. A lot of the other ones people take out on themselves, but these ones get kind of spilled over onto other people a lot, right? In different ways, but onto other people. Okay, when I see you next time, we'll keep going with the other two, histrionic and narcissistic, and then the anxious ones as well at the end. So I'll see you all, yeah, see you all on Wednesday. What's this? Face by